for that to happen. I will.
You're live.
I'm on?
You're live.
I'm on, okay. Welcome to the Board of Adjustment, this says 20, oh, that's the minutes there. This is the December meeting of the Board of Adjustment. We have an agenda, but first let's take a motion for approval of the minutes from the October meeting.
Also move.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carried. The old business is postponed until January 12th. New business, however, we start out with Erik and Andrea Hofeldt. Request for variance from the Loon Lake shoreline setback to replace and expand an existing cabin with the RCR zone district at the Loon Lake Lodge, Parcel ID 50-580-0301. Tim.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Loon Lake Lodge was established in the 1920s and has been a fixture on the south shore of Loon Lake for nearly a century. The resorts offer 8 cabins and a lodge with both shoreline and inland lodging configurations. Its location was included in the Loon Lake home sites plat in 1990, which was a state-generated plat for sale of government-leased lots. The lodge property is constrained by water, a road corridor, and topography, resulting in a structural layout that is largely within 100 feet of Loon Lake. The County Road 51 setback, or both, a 2017 variance for the resort was approved by this Board of Adjustment, allowing construction of decks on cabins 4, 5, and 6. Beyond that, permit documentation is not a common feature on the property, save for the 2005 variance-free construction of a property owner residence above the lodge, which cites the land use permit number. As presented, the applicants are requesting variance relief from the shoreline and road setbacks to construct a new cabin on the site of a former cabin or storage staff lodging structure. That structure has a long presence on the property and shows evidence of disrepair and discontinuation, as well as repair and continuation, with both iterations occurring under the guise of a non-conforming structure 9.02 of the Cook County zoning ordinance. Specifically, the Hofeldts propose construction of a new guest lodge with an increase in the footprint from the 336 square feet to 776 square feet, including a loft, and this does represent a structural increase of 120%. During the land services visits, concerns have been noted regarding building placement immediately adjacent to the shoreline. Current is 7 feet, is proposed is 10 feet, especially given evidence of the wetland resources of the build site. And any plans for the reconstruction of the cabin of the structure needs to take into account the wetlands resources and shoreline stabilization measures. The following conditions can be opposed if the variance is approved. The property will be in compliance with Minnesota Rules, Chapter 7080, and the Cook County zoning ordinance. All approved wetland impacts are adhered to as confirmed by the Cook County Wetlands Administrator. All vegetative management and erosion and sediment control requirements in accordance with Section 8.07 of the Cook County ordinance be in place. That's going to be 7, in Section 7. That's a typo there. Of the Cook County ordinance be in place prior to the construction of any structures, and the dwelling structure along with any overhang shall be located no closer than 10 feet from the ordinary high water of Loon Lake and no closer than 30 feet from Loon Lake Road. 21 notices were sent out to adjacent property owners, and at the time of the narrative preparation, actually 4 comments are in favor of the request were received. One from Laura and Darman Berg, Robert Brunings, Kathy and Wayne Bojan, and Linda Jurek of the Visit Cook County. Those are attached. You see those. And again, we have Mitch Travis on hand to be able to answer any wetlands questions. And this is basically to replace a cabin. And it's my understanding, too, that it is to accommodate for ADA reconstruction. And the Andrea Hofeldt is here to be able to comment.
Okay, thank you. We'll start right out then. Angela, if you're available, do you have comments that you'd like to add to the record here? And if you could step up to one of the microphones and identify yourself as well.
Hi. Well, thanks for listening to our second request here. I just want to emphasize that, of course, we are very concerned of preserving the shoreline and the wetland. And, in doing this, we are trying to establish relationships with everybody in the county to do this the right way and make sure that everything is inspected correctly and that it's going to be a good thing for the entire community. I do think that there needs to be an emphasis on the need for a fully ADA accessible cabin in this county. Right now, I showed data from Kudurski down in Cook County. She collected all of the data from all the resorts in the area, including Lutsen and Grand Portage, and we found that most of the fully ADA accessible cabins are hotels, and they're all down here in Grand Marais. So trying to build and propose this cabin, I feel is necessary for those older people who have limited mobility issues, who were the ones who established the boundary waters and came with their grandparents and want to continue coming. It's completely different experience being down here in Grand Marais versus up on the trail and being in a lakeside cabin, being able to look out onto the water and just enjoy that peace and quiet that everybody deserves. Yeah. I feel that Derek and I are really invested in this community. Just being a lodge owner, your reputation is on the line versus, like an Airbnb rental where the owner is not per se on site. So we are going to be there 24/7 for emergencies for these people who may have issues, and being down close to the water does give them great access to the lake, being able to take out a pontoon with their kids per se, and also have the lodge for a gift shop or a restaurant as well. Questions?
That's it? Okay, that sounds pretty good. At this point, I'll ask if there's anybody else from the public in the room that would like to make comments on this. Hearing none, I will, oops, I do. Go ahead. If you could step up to the microphone also and identify yourself.
I would just like to underscore that lack of accessible structures or places to stay on this part of Cook County. Run into the same thing with my extended family as well.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay. Hearing none, I will now at this time close the comments and reserve them to the board. So we'll start right out, one end or the other, if there are any comments. Go ahead, Keith.
So you're going to double the footprint on the ground, approximately. You're going to go from 336 to 776 square feet, right?
Not on the ground. On the ground, it's extending it by 180 feet.
180 square feet.
It's
Okay,
the upper level.
well, how does the loft fit in with handicap accessibility?
So there's only one bedroom down on the bottom floor for the wheelchair.
Okay.
People who need a nurse or, a family member to help them, we're hoping that that extra loft space would accommodate another person in order to help them get around.
Is there, my other question, because I got this kind of late, what's the difference in height in the buildings between what's there and what's proposed?
I believe it's only adding an additional 4 or 5 feet up top.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a comment. I was asked to go out to the property and reviewed it and had an opportunity to speak with the owners about their project. And one of the things that I thought was, I would like to commend you for was the fact that you looked out and sought out a lot of information about ADA accessibility, looking at doing things the right way, collecting data and information. And I happen to have a friend who has MS who has looked for places to stay along the Gunflint Trail. And being in a wheelchair, oftentimes he could find a place that might have a ramp to get in, but he literally couldn't turn around inside the cabin. And so the slightly larger footprint, when I think about it, would be something that would really help to accommodate someone, having things at the right level for somebody in a wheelchair as well, and then having the ability to have a care attendant stay in the facility. So I appreciate the fact that you've done your homework and that you've contacted people and made the appropriate changes in your design to meet the needs of people. And I'm just really happy that people are thinking about providing opportunities for people to enjoy the wilderness and enjoy the Gunflint Trail. So thank you for that.
I guess I have one more question.
Go ahead.
We often put conditions on in terms of color, requiring earth tone colors to make it blend in. Your description has like a cabin red. There's going to be a little more.
I think your printer's off.
Oh, is it? Well, I'm just seeing what I have here. The other question, what kind of roof are you thinking of putting on?
So we would go with whatever, the contractor best suggests.
Okay.
It could
Well-
be shingle, it could be metal.
Yeah, well,
Whatever is
the only
best.
issue would be, is if we were to grant the variance, we might want to put that we suggest earth tone colors and a muted color for the roofing. Because sometimes, it's going to stick up a little higher, and people sometimes, they put bright colors on the roofs, and stuff like that. And that would be my only thing that would, because it's so close to the shoreline, that you use earth tone colors and a muted color on the roofing.
A question I'd have, perhaps, Ms. Hofeldt, is do you plan, is the intent to have it stained like the rest of the log cabins that are there, so that it
Yes.
would tie in?
Yes, it absolutely wants to tie in
So
with
they're
the
brown.
other cabins. They are a dark brown with kind of a darkish green roof.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else?
I have a question. Is this the second time we've seen this request?
Yes, it is.
What's the difference?
So this time we came back with actual structural and conceptual plans. We hired out from a professional business down in Minneapolis. So we paid them to come all the way up for a site visit, and we've been working hand in hand with them. So instead of just kind of the overall picture, I've attached in the notes our actual ADA dimensions, showing that all the doorways are 36 feet. There's space in between the toilet. If you can't use a toilet when you are traveling, so I just wanted to make sure that those were in the plans, especially, all the horizontal bars, the vertical bars. I've looked at all the requirements in order for it to be fully ADA accessible, and I've included those in the floor plans just to show that we are truly invested and want this to be completely, fully ADA accessible. It includes also a roll-in shower, which there is not a single one up on the trail. There's a lot of bathtubs, which make it partially accessible. And so people who cannot lift their legs, or their wife travels with them and they can't lift their husbands, it's a complete roadblock for people. And so I think that roll-in shower is truly the biggest concern and thing that needs to be done right. And so we've reached out to professionals to make sure that it gets done the
Yeah.
correct way.
What prevents this exact design being placed elsewhere on the property that meets setbacks?
Sure. So if anybody has ever visited our property, it's a very, very steep drop-off.
We're all laughing because,
Yeah, yeah.
and the road.
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, you're on the Gunflint Trail
It's
side.
literally a cliff.
Yeah.
And so the only flat land is right next to that shoreline. If we tried to build up on top of our property right next to the Gunflint Trail, you know, people in wheelchairs would have to transfer into their car, drive down this steep driveway because it's a one-lane road. So, you know, you can't have somebody in a wheelchair along with cars that are flying by. It's just too dangerous. And so this location is kind of in a protected area where they'll have access to their car right there, the lake right there, without, you know, being in harm's way.
Okay, and what are you doing about, it's currently a storage building?
It
A
used to
shed?
be. It's staff housing. Part of it was staff housing. So it already has like the oven and refrigerator, beds, and then the other half of it was storage.
So if you convert it to a cabin, what are you going to do about storage and staff housing?
So we have decided that my husband and I can do this ourselves. The last 2 years, we've been doing it by ourselves because sometimes I'm at a ma and pa resort. It's very hard to find good employees that you only hire one employee and it kind of ruins the entire vibe if you have a negative person. And so it's just more work hiring another person than just doing it the two of us. And it really creates more of that like ma and pa quaint resort charm, just interacting with the owners and having us on site the entire time. So we just plan on having the two of us, and then I've also got 3 boys. So in 3 years, they'll be working with us.
Okay. And you
And
have a
then
home and
storage,
a
we've
place to
got-
live?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You have a home and a place to live and,
Yep,
okay.
yep. And then
And
storage,
the-
we've got another spot that we've kind of shifted storage for.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Well, my only question is, are the plans that we have here are going to be the ones that this will be built to when the building permit is issued?
That's, yeah,
Okay, so it's
all those
understood.
plans that were submitted, right?
Yeah, okay, because I know that's going to be a separate process, so. And the only other thing I would like to do is it would be possible, you know, when we get to the point of making a motion, that we say something about building colors and roofing color, just so it's understood from the beginning. And I understand that what you're doing, but I mean, you know, it's just nice to cross the i's and dot the t's here.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've got a question for Mitch Travis. If I'm understanding your letter correctly, this building as proposed can be done, or with administrative adjustments, but not with having to create a replacement plan. Is that?
So, I mean, there are some questions as to how, to be honest with you, I just looked at the plans. You know, my only other interaction was with Erik on the property sometime back in August or something like that, and I hadn't yet seen what the plans were. The Wetland Conservation Act is pretty specific when we're dealing with wetlands near to the shoreline. When we're talking about wetlands within the setback, which would be 100 feet from Loon Lake, I could only permit up to 20 square feet of further wetland impacts administratively.
Okay.
So it would be a numbers and geometry game. I don't know is, I guess, the question at this point. It doesn't, 20 square feet is obviously a 4x5 section or something like that. So there would be some question as to what exactly is an impact and where are the different pieces of the structure going relative to the wetland. I guess I would say all of my questions haven't yet been answered. So. that's what
Tim.
I'll leave it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's another one of the reasons for the condition in there, that even if the variance is granted, that it does have to adhere to the wetland rules. There are certain developments that we've had that have had The same with septic issues. We can grant a variance, but if they're not able to fulfill the septic rules, they're not able to do it. It's the same with the wetlands. We can grant the variance, but if they're not able to fulfill all of the other requirements as per the conditions, then they can't complete that.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Are there any others on the board that would like to comment?
I would support this with the conditions in place, just knowing the difficulty if even they were gonna improve one of the other close cabins, they'd still have to come to our board for some sort of variance because of the road and that, and it's fitting a need that's needed in the tourism, so I can support it with the conditions.
Okay, well, I'd like to make just a couple of comments then as well. First of all, I do recall this when it first came to us, and as hesitant as I was at the time about the way it was presented, I could see that it was a valuable project because it was going to add a resource that's very, very rare in this county. I'm pleased, enthusiastic is maybe a better word to use, for how this has turned around and what you've presented us. This is impressive, that you've gone to the lengths that you've had, the professionals that you have, and the considered from all aspects of the ADA and what the real needs of people are even beyond the ADA, that you've addressed them in a very impressive way. There are practical difficulties, and some of them still need to be resolved, as Mitch has said. But I'm fully confident that a resolution will be found on any of those particular circumstances as they arise. Mainly because of the turnaround and the way that you've come back to us with this. This is an example of working with us to solve a problem. And we have solved it. When this is completed, I think we will have solved more than a dozen different major problems in one project. I was also further impressed that even the Honorable Robert Brunings added a comment on this. And prestigious people like that are helpful too. That being said, I will turn it back to the board. I'll entertain a motion.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Adam, did you make a motion, or?
No, I
No,
didn't,
you didn't,
but
okay.
I'll make a motion to approve with the conditions as set.
Can I ask a question at this point would the applicant have any issue with the consideration of earth tone colors as a condition?
No, not a problem at all.
Not a problem. So can we look at adding that as a fifth condition?
Yes.
Earth tone colors. Tim?
Thank you. And then also to change condition number 3 to, say, section 7 instead of 8.0 something. Just a typo.
Yes.
All right. So, motion to approve with that added condition of earth tone colors and the change.
Yep.
I would second.
Okay, well, if we have a motion then that includes all the conditions plus a couple of extras, is there a second to that?
I would second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this project? Hearing none, I'll presume we're ready to vote. All in favor, as
Aye.
presented?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, go back a page here and. Our next item on the agenda is John Anderson, a request for a variance from the side yard property line setback to construct a garage at 1299 Golf Course Road, Parcel ID 53-104-4120. Tim.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request for an after-the-fact variance from the side yard property line setback to reconstruct a garage. Mr. Anderson had purchased the property in 2019 with a dwelling structure and an existing garage on the property. The property is situated within the FAR3 zone district, which has a 5-acre minimum lot size requirement. The property is an existing lot of record that includes 1.15 acres. It is clear in the aerial photo that the northeast property line had been previously adjusted to accommodate for the placement of the pre-existing garage. The side yard property line setback distance in the FAR3 zone district is 25 feet. The property is located within 300 feet of a protected water, which is across the road and to the east, and as such is determined to be within shoreland area. The property is relatively flat and construction does not impact any wetland areas. Mr. Anderson purchased the property a few years ago, which had already been developed for a dwelling structure, septic system, garage, and small shed. Mr. Anderson submitted for a land use permit in the fall of 2021 to tear down and replace his garage. The previously existing garage had measured approximately 10 feet from the north side property lot line. When Land Services staff visited the property for a site evaluation regarding the permit application, it was noted that the old garage had already been torn down and the new garage was already well under construction. The placement of the new garage had been moved further away from the line to the south of the property line, approximately 8 additional feet, for a total of approximately 18 feet. But the new garage expanded in size from approximately 16 by 22, 24 by 32 with a storage loft. The property owner was subsequently directed to cease and desist construction activities and advised of the potential resolutions, including acquisition of additional land from the property owner to the north, which would adjust the side yard property line setback again, or to pursue a variance. To our understanding, Mr. Anderson did indeed consult with the property owner to the north for a potential acquisition of additional property, but that discussion did not result in any new land transfer. Mr. Anderson has indicated that the affected adjoining property owner expressed no objection to him regarding the variance request, which actually is supported by the comment letter that we had received from that neighboring property owner. Mr. Anderson is requesting a variance to retain the after-the-fact constructed garage in its current location, and since the property does fall within the shoreland area, septic system records evaluation was conducted, and it was determined that the existing septic system is in compliance with Minnesota Rules, Chapter 7080, and with the Cook County Septic Ordinance. If approved, the following conditions could be applied. The structure be retained in its exact location with no expansion towards the north property line without an approval of any subsequent variance. All other remaining permits and approvals shall be obtained by the property owner as directed by the Land Services Department. 12 notices were sent to adjacent property owners, and at the time of this narrative, 1 comment had been submitted to Land Services from the neighboring property owner to the north that expressed no objection to the variance from the property line setback. That's the shared property line setback.
Thank you. Is there anybody in the room representing this property?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm getting COVID tested tomorrow, so I couldn't make the meeting.
Okay, and you are?
I'm John Anderson.
Okay. And John, what have you to tell us about this?
Well, I'm just replacing an old garage with a new garage. That's basically it.
Okay. Okay. The rest is pretty clear here. Let me switch and see, is there anybody else in the room that has any concerns or questions about this issue? Seeing no response there, I will pull it back to the board and open it up for our discussion here. And if we have questions for Mr. Anderson, we can pose them at that time. So, board members, comment.
Was the building permit granted?
The building permit was not granted.
Never applied for?
It was applied for.
Okay.
But the construction had taken place in between the time that it had been applied for, and the staff member had gone out for a review of the permit and noted that the old one had already been torn down, and this new one had already been constructed, basically. So a cease and desist order had been put into place, and hence the reason for this variance request.
And we had compliance in this case on the cease and desist.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. It's noted. Further questions? Further questions? Apparently, there are none. I will entertain a motion.
I would motion to approve with the conditions as stated.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to proceed. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to the vote. All in favor of the proposal with the conditions that are expressed?
Aye.
I,
Opposed, same sign. Carried out, done. One more item on the agenda here.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, John, for coming in on the phone.
I should probably, this next one, I should probably abstain from discussion and voting on because my employer does a lot of, does property management there, Cascade Maintenance Services, so I'm gonna abstain.
Okay,
Does that leave us a quorum?
Yes, madam, yes.
okay, well then we'll.
Four out of the five. You have
Yeah.
five
Oh.
Board of Adjustment members.
Yeah.
You could vote with three.
Okay, all right. Just checking.
All right, moving on then to item C, Stephan Helgeson, a request for a variance from the vegetation line setback distance to remodel and expand a cabin on Lake Superior at 3876 Cascade Beach Road. Parcel ID is 51-011-2100. Tim?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request for variance from the vegetation line of Lake Superior to remodel and expand an existing non-conforming dwelling structure. Mr. Helgeson purchased the property in question this year. The parcel includes 3.05 acres along with approximately 285 feet of Lake Superior shoreline. The property is situated in the North Shore Management Zone in the Residential 1 or R1 Zone District and is a conforming lot of record with a legal existing non-conforming dwelling structure. Lake Superior is characterized as a general development lake which has a structure setback distance of 40 feet from the vegetation line. The dwelling structure in question is an existing legal nonconformity constructed in approximately 1960 and may be replaced in its exact locations and dimensions without the need of a variance in accordance with Minnesota Rules 394.36. Any alteration to the exterior dimensions, however, would indeed require a variance. Mr. Helgeson purchased the property over the past few months and is looking to remodel the existing nonconforming dwelling structure in a way as to retain the existing cabin layout, but also add on to the structure as depicted in the application and drawings. The character of the immediate area along Lake Superior includes several neighboring properties with historic dwelling structures that are also existing legal nonconformities and which exist within the 40-foot setback distance to the vegetation line of Lake Superior. There is some discussion contained within the application regarding the shoreline setback averaging distance as depicted in section 7.102 or 12 of the Cook County zoning ordinance. Shoreline setback averaging provides for additional discretion of the Board of Adjustment for the granting of a variance using an average of measurements along adjoining property owners or properties plus either 10 feet or 20% of the average, whichever is greater. It is, however, difficult to utilize the provide calculation since the setback distance from Lake Superior is only 40 feet from the vegetation line. The provisions, however, do provide an element of consideration that the board members may use in deliberating on the character of the locality. And I'll just expand just a little bit real quick on that shoreline setback averaging. There are two kind of issues that we experience with the shoreline setback averaging. Those were originally created when we had the standard of hardship in terms of granting a variance. And so the setback averaging equation was put in to be able to do the setback averaging, and it granted the Board of Adjustment more leniency in being able to grant a variance without actually having to determine any other kind of hardship. Minnesota Rules 6120 actually has a different standard. They apply what's called a string test, and it's within their rules that you do a string along the lines of the fronts of each of the neighboring cabins, and they consider it to be okay to allow a variance up to that line but our ordinance had extended that 10 feet or 20%, which when I say it's a difficulty, that's what I mean. The shoreline setback averaging was intended to be, and it was created for the inland lakes where your setbacks are 100, 150, 200 feet. So adding 10 feet isn't really as big of a deal as when you're on Lake Superior, where the setback distance is only 40 feet, and you add that 10 feet, that's 25% of the setback distance. So it's a little bit more difficult to kind of work around that, but it is a consideration certainly to be able to use. I did in the following paragraph talk about the strength test. The provision afforded by the DNR, sometimes known as the strength test, allows the placement of structures without a variance that are in line with adjoining structures so long as they are not within the shore or bluff impact zones. As most all of the structures in this area are within the shore impact zone, though, this provision really doesn't apply. But again, those provisions may be used in further deliberation of the character of the immediate locality. The variance proposal is to basically remodel the dwelling and construct 2 additions, one on the west side and one on the east side, along with some deck additions to the lake side of the constructed additions, none of which are proposed to be any closer to the vegetation line than the existing structure. There does appear that there may be sufficient space to construct a new dwelling structure to the north and to the west of the current existing structure without the need of a variance. However, it may be less of an impact on the property to add on to the existing structure where it is located than making new clearing and building site, especially as that existing dwelling has the right of continuance. If approved, the following conditions may be applied. All vegetative management and erosion sediment control measures in accordance with section 8.07 of the Cook County zoning ordinance be in place prior to construction. Any construction shall be in accordance with the plan submitted to and approved by the Land Services Department and shall not be any closer, along with any roof overhangs, than the closest point to the existing structure to Lake Superior vegetation line. The property owner shall conform to Minnesota Rules, Chapter 7080, and the Cook County Septic Ordinance. 13 notices were sent to adjacent property owners at the time of the narrative preparation, and no comments have been received.
Thank you, Tim. Proceeding to the floor. Who is representing this issue?
I am Stephan Helgeson.
Okay. I want to proceed and add some commentary.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Tim. I think that was a very good description of the summary of the variance request, a little bit of the background in terms of the history of the cabin. I'm particularly interested in continuing the history. There are a number of cabins of similar design. I'd like to actually find out who the builder was in the 1960s that constructed this particular style, what I'd call a Swedish rambler. And there's some unique things to it, even like the siding that was milled by Hedstrom's that we're hoping to be able to replicate in the remodeling that we're doing. It is a small cabin. It's not much bigger than a garage, and we have an extended family of 4 children and their significant others, and we'll see what happens as that goes on into the future. And it's not very easy to get in and get out of. And both my wife and I would like to use this as we get older, and so accessibility is an important piece of it. Whether it's ADA, we talk about accessibility, that's making sure that if one of us were in a wheelchair that we can, there's 2'10" doors. Now there's 2'6" and it wouldn't work very well. Whether this is fully ADA compliant, as in the earlier requests, we're not at this point anticipating that roll-in showers and those kinds of things. But we do want to make it accessible. We want to make it easy to be at. We're fortunate it's on a very level site. It's a spectacular location. We can actually see Artist Point from our location. So regarding the 7.12C of the ordinance with regards to adjacent properties, both are very near the lake, to the east and to the west of where we are. We've had conversations with the owners to the east, the Foxes, Derek and Emily, And they've been supportive of that. I don't know if they got anything in time to you, Tim. And they're actually, you know, the breaker wall for the waves comes right up to their foundation. So, and it's a very similar situation on the Benson property to the west. So, you know, we're all kind of dealing with this. We do have riprap. We don't have any erosion on our bank. That was put in a number of years ago. But I don't know when the cabin was built. Maybe it was 40 feet back. You know, we don't know what the history of that is. My background is an architect and a landscape architect. I practiced for 45 years before I retired. So this is sort of a fun project for me, and one that I really want to turn out nicely. And I'm inspired by the history of the building, the simpler rambler shape. And if you notice in the drawings that we attached, we're trying to maintain that and still have a little bigger than a two-car garage for our family. So it's very, I think, modest in its ambitions, very responsive to what's there. We have the can of paint we can match, those kinds of things that are going to be important as we finalize the details. So with regards to the adjacent structures, our cabin already is about twice as far back as the average of those adjacent structures. And our deck is actually 7 times, I say 3 times further, but it's actually 7 times further back than their decks. So everything we're going to be doing is going to be further back. And I get that, and we want to comply with that as much as we can and still get a floor plan that can work and that we can utilize the existing structure. If we try to go off the north side of it, the whole form of it is gone, because it's no longer going to be a rambler. It's a, you know, the roof lines, the whole character of the building is going to change. You know, everything will be further back. The addition to the west will be an additional 6 feet further back at its closest point. And the addition to the east will be an additional 5 foot 6 inches further back from the closest point on the east side of the building. As well, both decks will be further back than the existing decks. So it boils down to sort of 4 components that we're looking at. One is the west addition, which is our entry and would be a master bedroom and master bath, which would be accessible, and the drawings are in there. That would also allow for a covered entry with steps, so we're not coming up the steps in the middle of the winter. If we need to, we can put ramps in that entry if we need to have it wheelchair accessible. The 3-season porch off the east side is, again, trying to find ways to accommodate our family because of the existing building being so small, particularly during the summer months. We are proposing decks adjacent to both of those structures. The deck on the west would be only 4 to 8 feet wide, and again would be further back than the existing structure. And the deck to the east, which would be a modest size just to accommodate family activities, again would be further back by 2 feet. We are currently dealing with the roof. Actually, I was on the phone with the structural engineer yesterday morning. We'd like to maintain what we have and add, open it up and add some insulation on the top, which would require maybe as much as 8 to 9 inches, maybe as much as a foot. Additional height. It just may not be feasible, and he may just say, take the roof off. And you know, you're just beating your head against the wall. And if we do that, then I want to put a steeper pitched roof on, deal with snow. We'd probably go to an 8-12, something that's still relatively keeping with the modest character of the building, which would be an additional 4 feet higher. So I think the rest is pretty self-explanatory that we put in the proposal. I'm happy to respond to any questions. We're very, very happy about being able to purchase this cabin. As you know, that's not an easy deal to go do along the North Shore. One of the things that I'm particularly excited is I ordered 500 seedlings from the DNR. I'm looking for volunteers in the spring But we're looking at reforestating, getting some white pines on the property. It's almost 4 acres, and so we see this as a sort of a whole thing, whole package that we're trying to improve for our kids and really leave it for them as a legacy. So, thank you for your
Mr. Helgeson,
attention.
thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else in the room that would like to comment? I only see one other person, and he's not going to comment, so. I will close the floor and bring it to the board. So let's start right out. Who has any comment on this?
How many of us have actually walked the site and looked at it?
None.
I have.
Okay.
And I have an association in years past with cabins like Dromheit, and I worked for a brief time. I'm a semi-retired cabinet maker and builder, and I worked for a brief time with a company that did the maintenance on a bunch of those all along Cascade Beach Road. This property and a couple, I don't know if Dromheit was, there's about 3 properties that are all owned by one individual that were ran as vacation home rentals.
The Blacks owned it, yeah.
Yeah,
North Shore
and
LLC. Yeah.
anyway, I have a problem with it because, as far as the setbacks from the adjacent cabins, I mean, those are somewhat similar. They're all really close because they were built 60 years ago. But most of those are all small. They're like Dromheit, the one you bought, and the ones closer to the east. And what you're proposing is is certainly not going to be close to the lake, but it's going to be bigger. It's quite a bit bigger. And you're talking about, the other issue I have is you're talking about possibly tearing the roof off, new windows, new doors. So basically you're left with 4 walls standing. How close do we get to the percentage of tear down? Wasn't there a figure?
Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, and Board Member Cuckler, there actually isn't a percentage now. The statute was changed, Minnesota
okay.
Statute
Well,
394. It can be completely removed
Okay.
and completely replaced 100%.
Right,
Just
right.
because of that, people were
right.
leaving one wall up or 2 walls up or whatever, so
Right.
that it can be
Well,
completely.
I know that standard used to be involved, and anyway, I look at it and I see you have all this is, did you try to do an architectural plan that would take into account not getting a variance, if this variance were denied? You have a lot of flat land back there, you have a propane tank that can be moved, the septic tank is the problem, but you could get a variance from the distance from the house to the septic tank. We've done that before. I know, we did it on one of Clarence Kemp's projects, that was a little too close to the house. And that, so what I'm getting at is that I don't see a lot of practical difficulty with making an addition, more square feet, and doing it farther away from the lake.
Can I respond to that question?
Yeah.
One of the things that we're trying to preserve is the very efficient and tight layout of the existing cabin. And the entry into the main living area is to the south of the fireplace, which is on the front side of that. If we change that, then we've lost the use of that space as it's similar to as it's currently being used. So to get into the cabin on the west side, we have to kind of come up to where we have the wall line right now. And so that's, if we come in into the back side of the cabin, it completely changes what it is.
Well, yeah, it may change,
we're
but what
doing
my point is it a big enough difficulty? Is it a practical difficulty that would prevent you from doing? I've worked with a number of architects, and you don't always come up with just one solution. Sometimes you have to go back and you have to rework it. And if this were a situation where you didn't have all that, it's a perfectly flat building site. There's parking area. You already have the garage slab in. you know, that there's, my problem is that, A, it's going to be bigger than the adjoining properties, so it does kind of affect the character of the neighborhood. If you look at the properties, those cabins along that road, they're all small, modest cabins. They were built mostly, I think there's some newer ones, but mostly about the time that, I think this is probably one of Irving Hanson's projects. But what I'm getting at is that, yeah, there's a setback from the lake that maybe not seems so different, but the size of the cabin is makes it different. It's going to make it stand out. And I don't know, you know, if you didn't have the flat level land and a lot of it, then I think you could have a better case for not moving your new construction back farther away from the lake. I mean, you'd have a real practical difficulty that was inherent in the land. Here it's a question of aesthetics and design, which I don't think are necessarily a practical difficulty. I mean, you're an architect. I've worked with people like John Howe and Salmala and all kinds of people, and you can come up with you may have to come up with a different plan. Now, if you were to add on to the back of the house, where does the back of the house fall within the setback? Is that?
There's a map.
Yeah, I think, was that just one corner of it?
No,
It's illustrated on this,
Yeah.
on this sheet, Commissioner Kunkler.
It is on page 71 of 84.
So, so the back of the house is in compliance, right?
Yes.
Okay, so, and if I'm looking at the right blue line, that kind of cuts from the center over toward an angle as you're heading east. So, in theory, you could do your additions behind that line. I mean, you could, I mean, if you might have to, you wouldn't need a variance, and you might have to rework the plan, but, you know, one of the things that concerns me is that one of our goals is to move properties to greater compliance. Now, this cabin is that really, like you say, because you're talking roof, windows, you know, bigger doors, all of that, it's 60 years old. And what we're looking at here, what you're going to do is we're kind of resetting the clock for the next 60 years. And so, to me, it would be really important, if possible, if the practical difficulties weren't insurmountable, that we bring this property into compliance, not into greater nonconformity. I mean, that's my issue here. I mean, and I walked it, and, you know, I see a lot of, you know, there's a lot of space to do it. It's not, and there are a few trees that have to be removed, but most of those trees are, you know, the balsams and spruce. If we have a 75-mile-an-hour wind tonight, you could lose half of them. I mean, I've seen it happen. They get to that point where they're 40, 50 feet tall and the tops break out. I mean, losing the trees isn't as important to me as the variance, because the variance goes with the land forever. The trees come, and like you're going to plant more, you know, they come and go. And I don't know if you'd have to remove that many right behind the house in that area if you had to do it, but it doesn't seem like it'd be a big enough practical difficulty to justify getting the variance.
I appreciate your comments, and I did look at that. One of the things that we then lose is the sort of the simple lines of a rambler. We're really talking about 10 feet.
Have you looked at the Witt property that's down the road, Cascade Road? There's a number of, I'm very familiar with a lot of the properties on that Cascade Beach Road. And, you know, there's a whole, I mean, I think that, I happen to believe you can find an imaginative architectural solution to any problem. But it may not be your first solution, and it may not have exactly the view that you might want from that one west or east porch. But at the same token, I don't think that there's a real practical difficulty here in meeting that. And that's why I can't support the variance.
Okay. Any words from,
I have comments, and I agree with Keith. I think that this kind of precedence, we're just, can you, is there a reason you can't build what you want to, well, not even what you want, what's allowed within the guidelines of the variance, or of the zoning ordinance?
What happens, and when I look at the plans, is that we lose the efficiency and we end up with a larger impact on the site. So that's one of the reasons why we're proposing what we're doing, is it's very compact. It really only doubles the size of the cabin. It's still only about 1,500 square feet total, which is, by today's standard, very small. I understand that the cabins next to us may also be small, but I can go up and down Cascade Beach Road, and you'll certainly find cabins larger than
But
1,500
every single
square.
person will come and buy one of these little cabins and want to build 20 feet from the lake. That's just what we're facing here.
Yeah.
well, each one of them is going to have to make that choice
Well,
when they do that anyhow. And we can't prevent them from doing that. That's going to be a consideration that we face, whether or not we approve this one.
Well, Jerry, let me go, reiterate here, is that if we want the neighborhood, the size of these cabins to reflect the neighborhood, then this is going to be, in this stretch, is going to be the outlier. I mean, all the other ones are smaller, these quaint, smaller cabins. Okay? If, like I said, if there weren't, as far as site disruption, you've already been doing work with putting in your garage slab, and, I mean, there's some trees back here, but the trees that you would have to remove if you moved it back are all back away from that shoreline setback. So they're not going to impact anything within the 40 feet. So, and as I said, if I looked at the trees and I see these, clumps of balsam firs, and I mean, I've seen enough of them. I mean, on my own property, they get to a certain height and they just snap off in a good wind, or they just tip over. But, so what I'm getting at is that the trees are not, to me, a practical difficulty. The site is virtually flat. It appears to have pretty good soils, not clay. It's kind of like an old beach shelf in there, just judging, looking at it. So I don't see any, in terms of site disturbance, it would be really minimal to get behind in that and stay behind without a variance. I think what we really need to do is maybe you need to sit down and, play with the plan more. And as far as the architectural quality of it, there are cabins along the Cascade Beach Road, historic cabins that date from the 20s, that are really architecturally significant. This is a pretty generic cabin that was built in the early 60s. It resembles, like you say, you call it a Swedish rambler. I mean, if you went from Richfield or any of the suburbs, you'd see a lot of similar little ramblers just like this. So I don't really see a need for the variance. I don't see a demonstrated practical difficulty to adhere to it here. It's a question of design, working out a design that gives you what you want.
Okay. I think you've made the point.
My comment would be, can I, go ahead, Jerry. My comment would be, if we go to our evaluating factors, if we were considering denying this, we would definitely need to look at this and determine really specifically what we're denying it on. And if I look at our question 1, 2, and 3, I really see no issue with that. Maybe there's an issue with 4. I think we're really talking about 5, 6 we haven't even considered. There's no issue there, so.
Can you read those?
But I would ask that if we are going to look at denial, that we're very specific so that the property owner has something to work with, so.
Right.
But personally, I have no issue with it. I think it's a good project, so.
Kim?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It is a difficult consideration, and what we're doing, a little bit of what I'm kind of hearing here is a discussion between a melding of the terms between hardship and the standards of hardship and the standards of practical difficulties. And the main question to be asked is not, can something be done or can the property be used without granting a variance? That's more in terms of the hardship one is the request reasonable given everything else? And I would echo Board Member Laboda's comments that if you do intend to go ahead and deny, that you go through the list and have a very
All right.
specified, clear
Yeah.
listing of that.
I'm willing to do that. I think that's a good idea. That's the approach. Start with number 1. Describe the practical difficulties that prevent your project from being accomplished within the parameters of the strict adherence.
I'll tell you, let me take over from there.
Okay.
Yeah, and let's continue on that. Number 1, is the variance consistent with the goals and policies of the comprehensive land use guide plan and is in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the county zoning ordinance? Comments?
I believe it's consistent with the guide plan.
Okay?
I don't, because I don't think it moves it, we're moving towards greater conformity. We're increasing the nonconformity. And I think it will, it is going to be out of character with the rest of the small cabins that are on either side of it.
Let me look for clarification there. You say it's increasing the out of compliance. I mean, it does not, it's not in compliance right now. If you're adding to it, you're still simply non-compliant.
Well, we're increasing the nonconformity.
They're putting 1,500 more square feet out of compliance.
Right.
The building is
Go ahead.
in compliance, it's existing nonconformity, so use of non-compliant is not the correct term to use. So let's keep our verbiage really clear here.
Right, and what I'm saying is that if it, well, I think if we're always trying, I mean, this was the philosophy that we used to have. Maybe it's changed.
Well,
Was that if possible, if there weren't any difficulties or practical difficulties, whatever, that would prevent it, our first option is to try to make properties conform rather than to increase, the nonconformity. And I mean, that's,
Is that accurate, Tim? I mean, Keith and I come from the old school, and
right.
that's exactly what I've thought all along. Is
but I think.
the goal is to
yeah.
bring everything into compliance as much as possible. This is not it.
Tim?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and board members Kuckler and Machenbacher. There used to be a term, if you remember when Mr. Carmen was chair of the board for many years, the term was called substantial compliance, and that was kind of the goal, and that was during the hardship standard, and that was by and large utilized during the conditions portion of it, that where we'd want to put conditions to actually bring a property more into compliance. It is kind of difficult to translate, and everything that you do is going to be a subjective evaluation of these standards. You go through these questions. There's a reason why there's 5 different people on here with 5 different perspectives, and that is to get kind of that whole different feel and different perspectives from everyone else. But it is true that the standard has changed from hardship to practical difficulty, and it is not the same standard. And it is more in terms of, is the request, that's where you start, is the request reasonable? And that's where you kind of start with it, and yes, if it is possible, you can talk, and if you have the questions that you had asked the applicant, and if the applicant provides reasonable answers as to why that wouldn't be applicable or something that he's capable of doing, then you have to determine, is that still reasonable then, because of the answer that he provided. It's not the same thing as saying, no, you can't, you can build to the rear without a variance, case over. It's got to be a little bit more thought out than that.
Well,
And I guess I would add, I mean, we're still on question 1. The the land use guide plan, and, you know, I can't tonight cite specific paragraphs of the guide plan, but I do believe this type of upgrade of existing structures was keeping with the feel of what was the intended development of that area. So that's why I feel it is in compliance with the guide plan.
If that were the case, then why did they establish, I mean, this cabin was built before there were any shoreline regs at all. So what happened is, at some point, was it 1984, or somewhere in about there, the county, and I think this is, you know, bigger because of Lake Superior, and it's, you know, but at any rate, they decided that, okay, there are negative impacts of building within that 40 feet. So we are going to establish this 40 feet vegetation line setback to mitigate those things. These weren't just an arbitrary line that they drew. And then, like you mentioned, certain lakes have larger setbacks, inland lakes. So that line was designed for a purpose, okay? And it's designed to, and it's not just what we see from the road or from here, but it's the viewscape from people on the lake. Kayakers, boaters, whatever, was part of the whole idea of that. I mean, that's what, you know, so that wasn't an arbitrary line. It was put there for a reason. And so the goal was, hopefully, back then, we often hoped, I think that when structures were, you know, outlived their usefulness, they would be moved back. Well, then we saw the huge increase in land prices, and pretty soon, you know, that kind of went out the window. What I'm getting at is that 40-foot line is for a reason. It's not arbitrary, and that if it didn't present undue or an impractical difficulty to stay within that, then I think you could have a case for granting it. But I don't see that.
Okay.
That practical difficulty here.
Can I respond to that? That line may not be arbitrary, but it is not an absolute. We're still dealing with an area where we can do things without being absolutely cut off. There are some things in the laws, especially environmental rules, that say you have to do it this way, or you have to do it that way. But we've got an existing structure. It was not built for permanent residency for a family like that. He's enlarging it to making it a livable structure is certainly within reason.
I think,
I think that what he's done is he's made a proposal on that, and we have to say, you know, disregarding absolutes, can we do this? I mean, how does it impact it? Does it, in this first question, we're looking at the land use guide plan. And one of the things in there is that we do want people to live in this county, not just to visit it in small cottages. So we know that in today's world, they're going to be looking at a larger structure to live in. And I think that's what the point is here. And I don't think that what he's done puts it outside the realm of our consideration. And that would, to me, that suggests that I agree with Charlie on that, on the first. Tim, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just really quick, at the same time that 40-foot line or any of the setback lines were put into place, was also a board like this established to be able to evaluate every request that comes in on a case-by-case basis, because it was understood that not everything was going to be adhered to that particular line. And with regards to reference to the comprehensive land use plan, I guarantee you there are no specific statements in the comprehensive land use plan that says you cannot by any means, violate the setback, or you have to set back. It's more generalized. That's the thing about comp plans. Comp plans talk about the use of the property in terms of residential, we want it minimal density, those kinds of things. It's not expressly talking about the dimensional aspects of the properties.
Thank you, Jim. And I worked a lot on the land use plan as we have it now. And that's different from the one that was there before. We're looking at with a different vision in this county than we were when some of these other rules were put in. And that's why we're here as a board, is to take a look and see if people are making reasonable requests to change some of those things, even if they're challenging some of those absolutes that we've lived with in the past. Yes, sir. You may.
So, I've done a lot of this over my career, and one of the things that we do is we do this setback averaging all the time in urban areas, and you take the two adjacent properties, and I know Tim mentioned that, and that's at 7.12C, which is in the zoning ordinance. And if you don't have a copy of that in front of me, I may just give a little more information on that, because, you know, in my mind, I mean, I don't want to say this to be rude, but if I the way I read this, it doesn't appear that we actually do need a variance. In other words, if I were to use this same language in another municipality, as an architect, I'd say, oh, as long as we comply with this, then we will be in conformance, because it is this setback averaging. I understand the 40 feet, I understand the intention behind that, but I also want to respect the fact that there are a lot of existing homes along this area that, you know, are going to be dealing with the same issue. And what it says is that the principal structure to be set back from the shoreline a distance equal to the average shoreline setback of certain nearby principal structures. That's the principal structure to the east and to the west of us. Plus a greater of 10 feet or 20% of the average. So the adjacent structures, the structure to the east is about 7 feet back. The structure to the west is about 13 feet back. You take the average of that, that's about 10 feet. Let's add the 10 feet that's required in here, and that would be 20 feet. There is nothing in the addition that is anywhere close to 20-foot setback. The closest we would be 25 feet to 26 feet back. Actually, 27 feet. So we are actually, meet this requirement and exceed the expectations of that requirement. So right from the very beginning, I said, I'm going to push this thing back as far as we can, but I want to keep it small. If we start having to push it back into the parking lot areas, it's not going to be 1,500 square feet for it to work for my family. It just right now it's extremely efficient, and so we're going to end up with a bigger cabin. So is the issue the size of the cabin, or is it the setback? If it's a setback, I mean, there's nothing in the ordinances that I read that you can't build a 1,500 square foot building. Okay, I mean, in today's standard, that's not 6,000 square feet. You know, I've seen the big ones go up for sale on the North Shore, and there's like 3,000, 4,000 square feet. We don't want to do that. We want to keep it small, and 1,500 is small.
Thank you. Charlie, did you have something you want to say?
I guess I was just I was concurring with you on the guide plan, that we're really not looking at a 1984 standard. We're looking at the character that we were trying to have in writing that guide plan.
Right.
So and that's where I'm saying I believe this does meet that. And so then I would guess, for the sake of moving forward, I would like to move through these conditions.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, can I have one final?
You get 1 minute.
Okay.
I need a minute.
The problem we have, as I see it, is that, okay, now you have a whole series of these small cabins along this string. If you go down there and look at them, and I've driven in them, I've worked on a couple of them over the years, what happens to the character if they all start expanding out to along the shore? Then Drum Height is the next one, and we go right down. It will totally change the character of these quaint small cabins. And I'm just saying that it's why I'm saying is trying to preserve the character that's there, part of the charm is these small little cabins, you know, that are, whatever, I mean, I mean, just, maybe I'm sentimental about them, but, I think we've beat this one, you know, I mean, we've got to move on here, so.
Tim, go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just a point of order, I should have mentioned this earlier on in the process when Board Member Triffle recused himself. What it actually says in the ordinance is that though he recuses himself, he can still provide comment or any kind of testimony. So noting that he probably didn't think that he was going to be able to, I wanted the opportunity for Adam to be able to speak as well.
Before that, I'm going to let you have your 1 minute.
Okay, what are you doing about the foundation under the current cabin?
It's in excellent shape. It's a CMU, there's been no settling, it was done right. It's not.
Is it a crawl space or is it a basement?
It's a crawl space. It doesn't meet the 60-inch minimum footing depth requirement now by the UBC or the Minnesota Building.
But are you putting new footings in?
No, we're gonna leave that, and then we're gonna do a crawl space under the new part.
Okay.
But not the screen porch. That would just be post footings.
Okay.
And also too, I just wanted to mention that the site plan, those dimensions are smaller as we continue to work with the plan, because our goal is to keep this as small as possible. And the plans that we submitted may even be smaller when we actually build it, because that's what we want to keep. This is a modest project, so.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you again, Mr. Hofeldt.
We're going to make our variance approval or denial based on the plans were presented tonight, where it's not.
Adam,
I think this fits the guidelines of those. I don't think it's anything outrageous or that, and I do a lot of work on Cascade Beach Road, and
okay.
I've seen all the improvements.
Well, I'm going to make a ruling on number 1, is that we'll give that a 50% since there seems to be 2 board members that support it and 2 that don't. So that gets a 50%. That leaves it neutral. Is the proposed use of the property in the land use district in which the property is located? I think that's pretty clear. That's self-answering. Is the property owner proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the Cook County zoning ordinance?
No.
I don't think so.
Well, but, I mean, according to 7.12.c, I am in compliance, so the ordinance does allow that.
Right.
Because of the adjacent property. Yeah.
All right, so we satisfy that. On the point 4, has the property owner established that the practical difficulty involved is due to circumstances unique to the property and not created by the property owner? Well, again, I think that we can address that and say, yeah, you know, it's.
I don't think so. I mean, it's totally for the benefit of the property owner, and there's a reasonable way to meet the zoning ordinance.
It's a unique situation.
Not so unique.
And I think that what we're going to see more of in the future in this county, worrying about it standing out, as more of these small cottages are going to want to be usable in larger circumstances. So if he's just the first one, the others are going to fall in place. Or if he gets denied, the others may still come to us and request that. Suddenly, we're going to have a raft of people, but none of them are going to stand out if they do that.
Well, Jerry, that's been going on for.
It gives us a consistent view of the current long-range plan. All right, let's, will approving the variance maintain the essential character of the locality?
I'm going to argue no, because
Okay.
it's going to be what you're going to see is a much bigger structure. It's going to have a taller roof, and it's going to be a little out of character with the other smaller properties on that whole little stretch there. So that does, to me, that does seem important to me. Now,
Just a point here, Tim. Have any of the other property owners suggested any problems with this? I mean, they must have been notified.
Yeah, we've received no comments.
Okay, apparently, nobody else in the neighborhood shares that concern.
Well, that's not the point, Jerry.
Oh,
I mean,
it certainly
we don't give
is.
neighbors the point, we don't give neighbors the right to veto.
I'm charged right now, because right now I'm telling you that we're simply evaluating our answers here. This is not, none of these are absolute conditions.
Right.
These are simply an evaluation of how we're looking at it. And and when you ask that question, the essential character of the locality.
The drawing has no resemblance to the cabin that's existing. It's a totally different style.
May I comment?
I would disagree with that. I would
No,
totally
no,
disagree with that.
We are maintaining.
Mr. Helgeson, go ahead.
Excuse me, yeah, we are maintaining the style. The building is slightly larger than the existing building. And, but we are maintaining the style, the character. I even mentioned earlier that we even are actually going to match the color because we like the history that's in that building. So from the road and from the, it will be a slightly bigger building, but it's of the same style. Matter of fact, there's some white benches on the front deck. We're going to put that in the front entry. We are, stylistically, it's going to be the same. And so, what I'm confused about is the size discussion. Because if the variance is denied, the building will be bigger. If we have to stay completely back because it changes the circulation and it won't be as efficient. So if you want the small size, then what we've proposed is the smallest, compactest thing that we can do so that it can be a livable structure for a family doesn't have the needs of a 1960 family.
Correct.
I want to raise a point here, if I can.
Please request the floor. I want to keep this a little more in order now, since there seem to be a lot more things. But go ahead, Keith, you got a minute.
All right. This is more than our view. We're protecting a resource that belongs to the whole state, to the nation. More and more and more recreational uses of the lake. I've seen it. I've seen the view. Are you a sailor? Do you boat on the lake? Okay. You have a different perspective when you're out in the water looking back on the shore. And when you start seeing bigger and bigger buildings, I'm talking about square feet. I don't think you're unreasonable that way. I'm saying, but you are talking about doubling the size and stretching the building out. So it's going to have and raising the roof. So it's going to have a much bigger visual impact from the lake. That's important to me. I don't sail anymore, but I have friends that do. I have friends that kayak. I have friends that recreational boaters. That whole stretch of the shoreline is a recreational kayak trail, recognized by the state, I believe. So I think what I'm trying to get at here is if there's a possibility of conforming, of coming up with a plan that moves everything back, where there's no practical difficulty. We all agree it's flat soil, it's level, there's no issues with topography here. It's a question of an architectural design. And I'm not quibbling about the size, Jerry. I'm just quibbling about the thing is, we have to look at the lake, look at this from just more than one little narrow viewpoint.
Okay. Charlie?
I guess I'd like to make just one more point that I think maybe was pointed out by you earlier. Whatever size of locality we're trying to determine, if we go out further, there's certainly larger structures that it's in maintaining with. And if we stay local, there's been 13 adjacent owners. We're not adjacent owners. There's been 13 adjacent owners who have not expressed any opposition, so therefore I would say they don't think it's out of character for the locality. So whether we go bigger or we go smaller into those 13, those owners, if they felt it wasn't fitting, would have written a letter to us suggesting that. So I'd just like to point that out.
Thank you, Charlie. That's a very good point, too. That's a big lake out in front there. And there's a lot of different stuff besides that little cottage on that lake. Some of it's not so pleasant to look at. But if you're sailing, you're going to see it. would you, if you sailed 100 miles along the shore there, and that house was there, would you say that that would be probably the most outstanding and offensive structure against what other properties you might see along that same shore? I don't think so. It seems to me that that's entirely reasonable. Go ahead, Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to put some focus on this and talk about our mission. That for land services, our mission, I'm just going to read it right off the website.
Good.
The mission is implemented through the application of professional services, the adoption of plans and standards to facilitate the growth of the local economy, enhance the quality of life, and preserve the natural environment for current and future generations. It's to provide solution-oriented services to the community.
Thank you. That's an excellent reminder that we're not here trying to enforce an old standard. We're trying to look at a new application that may be the coming change that we can't stop anyhow. We have to consider it, and in my view, he's made a very reasonable request. He has not encroached any further on the shore, and says that part of it, and this is the last number 6, the practical difficulty involves more than economic considerations alone. He's actually trying to minimize that. I don't think he's afraid to spend for the larger building. He wants the smaller building. And so I think that he is matching the spirit and the intent of the area. This is not wilderness there. This is a shoreline where people have to live, and if they've got houses there already that are inadequate, they're going to want to change them. And I suspect that Mr. Helgeson's request is not going to be the last one we hear. We're going to come across this time and time again as people keep looking to move here. We haven't had a large change in our population base, but the COVID in the last couple of years has changed a lot of that. It's put more pressure on more properties up here, and more people are wanting to live in those properties. And we can put ordinances up all over the place, but we're not going to stop them eventually.
Can I ask Ann a question?
Yes.
Can you reread the thing about preservation of the environment and you know, because I think aesthetic views and all that are part of that.
Hold on just a minute, I just clicked it away.
Yeah, if you can read the entire statement again.
All right.
In the planning commission.
Darn.
That's what it is.
It's not letting me down there.
But you can.
A little laptop.
Affirming.
Mr. Helgeson, a
May
question?
I make a comment? Yeah, and again, just trying to get back to this the roof issue. We don't intend to tear the roof off. It's only if the structural engineer tells us we need to. So if I recall, I first said that we want to try to maintain that roof. We would add 6 inches, which would be nominal, just to add insulation to the exterior. We are not proposing a 2-story structure. We don't need a variance for a 2-story structure. We don't want a 2-story structure. So the impact could be significantly more than what we're doing on this parcel and what we're doing in our plans.
Thank you. And just to add to that, I think that that's an important part, is that a lot of these structures are not going to be 2-story, because a lot of them are people that are getting older that are now getting more concerned about having 2 floors.
Exactly.
They want everything on a single floor.
I think
Now, you have the capacity to go up But that doesn't help you.
No, because
No.
we'd have to put an elevator in, and I don't want to do that.
Well, you'd require a variance to go 2 stories.
No, you know.
You wouldn't?
Tim, you could go a second story without a variance? on
Not
the
in the
original-
existing structure, but I'm understanding him to say in a new structure. If he built a new
Oh, yeah,
structure,
yeah, but not in the
Not on the
existing one.
current
not in the existing structure.
Right, no, I mean, that's what I think that was the confusion. What, and,
So I'll read it. The mission is implemented through the application of professional skills, the adoption of plans and services to facilitate the growth of the local economy, enhance the quality of life, and preserve the natural environment for current and future generations. Our mission is to provide solution-oriented services to the community.
okay, well, I think the word there that is, we're talking about preserving the natural environment. And that's why we have the setback rules. And if we can live within them, we should strive to do that.
I'm going to disagree with that. I'm going to say right now that enhancement of the quality of life up here is equally important to that. And I think that denying this puts us in jeopardy of denying somebody the quality of life that they look for, and that goes against our plan. Charlie?
Mr. Chair, if the board would entertain it, I'd like to make a motion to approve with the 3 conditions as written.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? I will make the second. We have a motion and a second.
I have some discussion.
Okay?
The current cabin is 32 feet long, and the additions add up to 20 to 50 feet additional length to this property, this house.
I'm sorry, say that, I missed that. Say again,
There's
please.
26 and 24 extra feet adding to this house. It's doubling plus. It's going from 32 feet to 82 feet.
Yes, that's correct.
That's a big impact. And this could be done within the current zoning setbacks
Okay.
and comply with the current law.
I would be willing to drop the porch. We just take the porch
don't-
off
You're still
the
within-
request. If the size is the issue, because,
It's
the
the-
I
because,
think
Impact.
that's seems to be coming down to being what the question is the size.
My-
And he can comply and build it bigger, and you're not concerned about that. By keeping it smaller, you're worried about somebody 400 feet out on the lake might see one of the wings of his house.
Point of clarification here. I think, we're not saying that 1,500 square feet is out of line. We're
No.
saying that we're going to have an 80-foot building where there was and this is going to
32.
accept, I mean, we can't look at just stand on the shore and look out. I think we have to also look at the shore from the lake and the impact, the visual impacts all along that lake.
And we just granted a variance to build within 10 feet of Loon Lake. But there was a cliff, and there was handicap accessible. There were practical difficulties that prevented doing it
Right.
within the current law.
But we can't use any other decisions that we've made as the basis for making this decision. This is going to be made on the basis of what Mr.
Okay,
Helgeson
I
has
can do
presented
that.
to us. And we have a motion on the floor. Any more comments from me on this?
I'm not going to support it because I think there.
Do you have further comment that, of
okay.
relevance? Okay. And you?
No,
Huh?
no, I'm,
Okay, well,
my mind made up.
we're going to have a tie vote. Tim?
Mr. Chair, there is actually a very interesting component to our zoning ordinance that allows for somebody who has recused themselves to explain the reason for the recusal, and the board can discuss amongst themselves as to whether to allow that person to vote or not. We cannot have a tie vote. You cannot end on a tie. It has to go up or it has to go down.
Thank you.
Or it can be tabled.
Thank you.
I think Mr. Helgeson has agreed that the plan is, he would possibly open to modification. you just said.
Point of order,
I mean,
Mr. Chair. There actually, you can recognize that there was, would be a tie vote, but there wasn't actually a vote. So I'd like to see.
I would make a motion to table.
No,
You have to vote.
the original
on
We have a motion on the
Current
floor.
motion.
You
Okay,
cannot do that.
Well, let's vote.
So in order to resolve the vote, we have to
Yeah, but
determine
vote.
whether the fifth member who has recused himself should be allowed to explain the reason. Tim, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would recommend that you go ahead and just take this vote. I think it's pretty clear that it's going to be 2-2. It's going to be a tied vote. And then I think at that point, you can entertain whether to consider allowing Board Member Trefoil to be able to vote or not, and then move on from that point. But I think you should take just a straight-up vote
Okay.
that has been proposed.
All right,
on the motion.
for the record then, all those in favor of Charlie's motion to approve? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign?
nay.
It is 2-2. We now have to determine, in order to resolve this,
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to table.
I'm not going to recognize that motion. We have a member here that we can resolve this with, and tabling it will still put that member in the same, we have 5 members of this board. We don't have a 6th one, and there's nobody else
But
coming
the
on.
applicant has indicated a willingness to change, to amend his plan to maybe accommodate the votes of the, I can't speak for Judy, but maybe for myself.
Okay. I'm, like I said, I'm not going to recognize that motion. I am going to bring up that we need to consider whether to add in our Adam's reason for recusal and whether we should permit him to vote.
Yeah, I recused myself because
Yes.
I've done past work on that property for my employer, and they probably have future work planned with him too. I mean, I'm not gonna financially gain from it. My employer would, of course. Just like probably 50% of those properties on that road, my employer has us do work on them in one way or another.
Okay, what is the reason, what are the reasons that people need to recuse themselves? I think it's when there is a conflict of interest.
That is correct.
Isn't it has to be, it gets more defined, is it a certain percentage of your income
There,
has to be involved and?
There are two, Mr. Chair, there are two levels of conflict of interest, one being a specific legal conflict of interest. And you're right, I mean, we have realtors, we have cabinet makers, we have gravel, so there are those issues in which people do, from a broad perspective, do and can obtain some financial gain, but it's not direct financial gain to it. It does have to be more direct than that, and then there's the perceived. If there's a perceived conflict of interest, and that's what this would be about, so that you guys can talk about it and determine whether there's sufficient or not. Let's see here, let me read it. Okay. Any question of whether a particular issue sufficient to qualify, sufficient to disqualify a member from voting shall be decided by a majority vote. The member who is being challenged shall not vote, nor his presence be counted to determine the majority of those attending. So it's basically what you guys have already done, is he's explained it, and you guys just talk amongst yourselves, and you can determine by vote as to whether he can vote or not.
Yeah, he
Down to
recused
4
himself.
Because just out of ethics, I thought it would,
He can
I
request.
waive his recusal?
Yeah, and he can withdraw that recusal upon consideration of the rest of the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, because he does not have a financial gain. He is not, he does not have a financial conflict of interest.
He gets a paycheck from the company that works for this fellow.
Yeah, well,
And there's possibly undue
That's
influence.
not
doesn't
sufficient.
necessarily mean I will be working at that property in
Right.
future.
Right.
work.
Well, you said you were already working on it.
I have,
Hey.
yes.
I would suggest that this recusal is based on speculation of a potential future gain. And I maybe should have been recused of the same reason, that maybe I will be doing the excavation for him or subcontracting to the, whatever contractor he may hire, or maybe I'll be selling some of the products to them and have just as much financial gain.
And if there's
So-
that possibility, you should recuse yourself.
Well, wouldn't you may future sell the land under the same speculation?
Right.
But what we're saying is that Adam has worked on the property.
For a previous owner,
No,
No, I.
For this owner,
for this
yes.
owner.
okay?
No, wait, may I, can I clarify? The property was with Cascade Vacation Rentals. My wife and I have not made the final decision whether we will continue with that after we make our improvements. We may want nobody in there except us.
Right.
Okay?
But, okay, so I think we're back to if Adam can't vote, and if Judy and I don't vote to grant to do it, then we're back to a deadlock.
Is there
okay.
sufficient reason for Adam to not vote?
All right. Adam, are you comfortable that you think you need to recuse yourself, or did you do it simply because you thought there's a possibility in the future?
I did it because there's a possibility.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to withdraw your recusal. Okay. And you now may participate in the board.
Okay.
Charlie, do you want to make that motion again?
I would restate the motion to approve this variance request with the 3 conditions as stated,
Okay.
as written.
Adam?
I support this by going down the
No,
list.
do you want to second it?
Yeah, I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. We now have, is there any further discussion on this?
I think you're making a big mistake, but other than that,
I,
fine.
Well,
if you,
I want to,
Not about the zoning, but what we're doing here as a board.
no, I think that this would survive a legal challenge, what I'm doing.
I'm not going to vote for it, but I want to make it clear why I'm not voting for it. Because,
Okay, no,
well, no, I think that, I have that right, Jerry.
Okay.
I want to explain my vote because it's important that I too have applied these standards. And I agree that there are some that are met, but I also agree that there are some that don't meet it. And that's why I'm going to vote against it. I'm not being arbitrary here.
I understand.
Okay, well, that's just, I
And,
want that on the
and
record.
I accept that, and from the opposite side, I'm saying exactly the same thing. You know, we have a difference there, and you may think I'm wrong, and I can just rightly say, I think that you're wrong.
Yeah, I just wanted to make it clear that I wasn't just saying no because.
Oh, no, Keith, I trust your honesty. You are not a dishonest person, and none of the members of this board, to my knowledge, would do anything and undermine it like that. But I need to bring it to a decision, and the only thing that keeps us from that decision was the thoughtful recusal of a board member who thought, just stay away from it because he might get something from it in the future. Ann?
If you think about a conflict of interest, I'm just going to share a definition that I've learned as I've become a commissioner that's been helpful for me in similar situations. A conflict of interest occurs when an individual's personal interests, their family, friendships, financial or social factors, compromises his or her judgment, decisions, or actions. And so
Okay.
that would be the question for Adam to be thinking about.
And from what I've seen from Adam and his statement about why he recused himself, that would not apply. I've studied that same rule quite a bit. So I think that in the interest of actually coming to a resolution, because without doing it this way, we have no resolution, and that's impossible. I will call it to a vote now. All those in favor of the proposal signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed?
Nay.
Opposed.
Thank you. The motion is carried, and thanks for your perseverance. And I appreciate the fact that you raised the questions and have that protection. We need that, we need to have division sometimes. That concludes the business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and commission members.
I'll move
Thank you.
to make a motion to adjourn.
Then move to adjourn.
I'll
All in
second.
favor?
Aye.
Aye. So moved.
I'd like to